So welcome to our workshop. Happy to see people in the audience. Welcome to my board. And we have some folks online as well. Always. Okay, I think we have some presenters online. I want to say that we have some other folks here. The board members will be introduced when we do the quorum call. So we have our executive officer, Chris Leaf, to my left. We have our deputy executive officer, Andrea Buckley, to my right. I have to remember this. We have our attorney, Mr. Keith Dua, there. We have our chief engineer, Michael Wright. And we're happy to have new dad, Jonah Knapp, back with us, our everybody person here to do that. So the first I'm going to ask our executive officer if he has any announcements or information to give to us.
None today, thank you.
Okay. All right, well, that was fast. Okay, then we'll proceed. I call this meeting to order of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board of February 13th, 2026. Is that right? I typed 2025. That's probably not the only person who has done that recently. Okay, so there we are. So the first action with the vote is to establish attendance and quorum. So Mr. Knapp, will you call the roll for that?
Member Andrews?
Present.
Member Bosler?
Here.
Member Countryman?
Present?
Member Griego?
Here.
Secretary Johnson?
I'm here. Good morning.
Vice President Valines?
Here.
President Dolan?
I'm here. So we have 6 here present in the room, and we have Board Member Countryman joining us online. Nice to have you with us, Joe.
Thank you. I can't wait to be back in person.
We can't wait either. We miss you, but we're happy to hear from you always. So now you know who the board are. Oh, here it is. I'm going to do just a very brief overview of the agenda. It's just brief, just to make sure that we are doing them and won't be any specific changes. So we've done the roll call. We've done the welcome. We have no introductions or announcements. We'll do public comment after I stop giving you this brief overview. We have 3 board items that all are very interesting, and they will be introduced individually. Then we have board members who will give updates on what they've been doing and committee updates and just general board comments, not any action. We will give you an overview of upcoming meetings, and then we'll adjourn. So I think our board items and our presentations are going to be really interesting and going to move us forward into the 21st century, I hope. So there we are. First item for me to call upon, well, board members have any adjustments they want to make to the calendar? None. Do you know of any? Okay, then we'll proceed as the agenda is written. Thank you. The first item for me to announce is public comment time. This is a time on all public entities' agenda where people can provide information or comments to the board for items that are not on the agenda and for which we do not take any action. Does anyone have a comment and want to come forward and say something to us? I see no one in the audience. Do we have any hands up? No? Then we'll proceed. We'll proceed to board items. First board item is 5A, and I'm going to ask Mr. Ego Young, and you're always very kind about my pronunciation, and I know I will eventually get it, but I'm happy to see you this morning, and I will turn this to you to introduce the item and the presenters. I think it's just you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see y'all and nice to be back. Morning, President Dolan and members of the board. Again, I'm Ego Liang. I'm the board operations branch manager. Today, I'm going to give and kind of provide an update and of the status and also outline kind of a tentative schedule moving forward of a rulemaking effort, which is primarily on Title 23 technique standards. Title 23 is California Code of Regulation, Title 23 Waters, and Division 1. I'm going to refer that as Title 23 in the rest of this presentation, just to clarify.
Well, it would be fine with me if you would take control of all of Title 23, but we only have Division 1.
I just want to clarify that. Next slide, please. Some background. Title 23 provides regulatory procedures and standards for the board to carry out our duties authorized under California Water Code. So pursuant to Title 23, the board enforces and also enforces appropriate standards within its jurisdiction on behalf of the state for construction, maintenance, and protection of the adopted plan of flood control that will best protect the public from floods. The current Title 23 regulation was approved through the Office of Administrative Law, OAL, in 1996. Over the last 30 years, there have been many changes that bring both the board and the regulated communities to a condition that is substantially different from 30 years ago. Army Corps engineering manuals, which provides guidance on flood control projects, have had multiple updates and revisions. The state has updated policies on flood protection standards, particularly in urbanizing areas. Also, new data and technology allow more efficient procedures and more practical standards. Lastly, staff's improved understanding of the regulations accumulated over decades of implementation makes it a prudent practice to update certain regulation to improve clarity and achieve a greater implementation consistency. For all those reasons, the board recognized all these changes. So started in 2018, there was a rulemaking effort led by Board Councilor Jit Dua. That effort was primarily focused on Article 8 technical standards, along with necessary updates on Article 2, a definition to support the Article 8 updates. A board-approved rulemaking package was submitted to OAL in 2022, but was administratively closed in 2023 due to missing a deadline to close out some OAL comments. Since then, new ideas to further update the regulation have been constantly brought up and added to this rulemaking package. Because this track of rulemaking is primarily on technical standards, I will use technical standards name tag to refer to this track of rulemaking effort. Also, to help the remaining presentation, I'm going to define a version to refer to a certain stage of this rulemaking effort when major changes, updates are made. So for example, I will call this package that was closed in 2023, I will call that 2023 version. Next slide, please. Go ahead.
I understand. So that was sent to OAL, but it was never finalized.
Correct.
It was just closed, and so there was no changes made to the regulations.
Yeah, they have, yes, you're right.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
And that was Board Member Bosler.
Thank you.
I have a question of you, Board Member Bosler. Did you do this? Okay. I'm just trying to learn. No problem.
All right, continue. So in 2024, the board initiated another rulemaking effort, which is a fee regulation effort, while also renewing the technical standard update effort. Both the fee regulation and technical standard updates were presented to the board at the August 9th, 2024 workshop. In that workshop, Steve Lamb, permitting section manager, introduced the technical standards updates to the board with a few new proposed changes, as shown on this slide. So those changes were added to 2023 version. So I will call that package of the workshop as a 2024 version. Next slide, please. So the two rulemaking efforts presented at the workshop were moving forward in a parallel but coordinated fashion. It was our plan that time. We thought those two needed to cross and merge at some time in the future. To effectively move the two sets of rulemaking efforts with limited staffing capacity, it was decided to prioritize the fee regulation first, while continuing to refine and update some pieces of the 2024 version. So the fee regulation has progressed as expected. The initial package was submitted to OAL in November last year, has passed the mandated initial 45-day public comment period, and is slated for a public hearing at the February 27 board meeting before its final stage OAL review and approval. So if everything goes as expected, the final fee regulation approval could occur sometime before July 1st, 2026, allowing it to become effective on July 1st, 2026. That's our goal. Our plan for the ongoing 2024 version technical standards was to make it ready for initial OAL submittal soon after the fee regulation is approved. So to get to that point, there are a few things we needed to do. The next couple of slides will highlight those items and outline a tentative schedule. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the 2026 version. That will be built on top of 2024 version. Since the 2024 workshop, a significant effort has been made to update the definition of maintenance activity in Title 23, Section 4. Without diving into detail, the key changes on that definition is to differentiate between maintenance on system features, flood system features, and maintenance on encroachments, with the purpose to simplify processing maintenance work for flood system features. As a result, besides revising the definition, a new language is also proposed to Title 23, Section 6D, for a more streamlined procedure to handle system future maintenance requests. The proposed updates on these two items have incorporated comments from board upper management and also from representatives of Department of Water Resources, Central Valley Flood Protection Association, and many other maintaining agencies. It has been shared with the local maintenance agency board work group participants. A second item to that major change is in Section 133. That is a supplemental standards for control of residential encroachments in RD 1000. This change is necessary to be consistent with Army Corps' supplemental to standard operation and maintenance manual published in 2023. Lastly, we will need to update the 2024 version where the fee regulation may affect. This includes the revision to the encroachment definition, the new definition of flood system improvement project, and some language in Section A regarding the format of application submittal. Those are some changes that needs to be reflected. Next page, please. So this slide intends to provide a tentative timeline from now until the final approval, and throughout this period, what preparation work will need to be done for its effective implementation. Again, this timeline is based on the anticipation that regulatory fee update will become effective on July 1st, 2026. So there are 4 milestones shown in reddish text about the time bar. An informational briefing at the May board meeting to review major changes, focusing on the changes that the board has not seen since 2024. That will be an opportunity to provide much detail about those changes. The July board meeting for the board to approve the initial rulemaking package, then send the package to OAL in August, and the final rulemaking approval in February 2027, 1 year from now. That's tentative schedule, high level. So dive into that. From now until the July board meeting, we will prepare regulation notice package, which will include express terms, which is essentially the proposed language with updates made to the 2026 version. The notice of a proposed action, which is to notify the public that the board will hold a public hearing in a future meeting to consider adopting the proposed regulations. The package will also include initial statement of reasons to describe why these revisions are being proposed. And finally, the economic impact statement, which is required by the Department of Finance to describe short-term, long-term economic impact to the public and to the private entity as a result of this proposed regulation update. So upon both the board approval of the initial package assumed in July meeting, we expect to submit the initial OAL package within a month to address comments from the July meeting. From the initial OAL submittal to the final approval, we anticipate this will be an iterative process with multiple hurdles. We have to work around or jump over or remove along the way. But we estimate that this process will take approximately 6 months. At the bottom of this slide shows the ongoing effort to get us ready for implementation. To effectively implement the new regulation, we will need to develop a new set of conditions according to the new technical standards to be used in future permits. We will update permitting SOP, standard operating procedure, to reflect updated procedures, and also to help both internal staff and the public transition to the new sets of standards. We will develop guidance document and training material for staff use, and we'll develop outreach materials, newsletters, fact sheets, FAQs, and etc. to help public notifications and education to the regulated communities. Although it is probably too early to tell, I expect the effective date of the new regulations will be a few months after the OAL approval, allowing a transition time for the regulated communities to begin design new projects according to the new set of standards. So with that, I conclude my presentation. If there's any question, happy to take.
Thank you. Let's go back to the slide that has estimated timeline instead of the slide that says thank you. Thank you. Don't go back to thank you, though. All right. Do board members have any comments, questions, input on this presentation? Let me look to my right. Andrews, Bosler, Johnson? Yes?
Apologies if you said this. How, for the changes that are being described here, how many of these exist as rewritten, actual text to the regs, and have they been, circulated to people, or is that all still future tense?
Thank you, Board Member Johnson, for your question. So up to the 2024 version, up to that, and so to step back, 2023 version has already been fully vetted for a lot of kind of iterations, public input. The 2024 version has been shared with the board, and some of the key changes have been discussed with a lot of entities like association, local maintenance agency, and also the change about the maintenance has been discussed among many entities, DWR, local maintenance agency. I think the only new things will be the Section 133 supplemental standards is about visibility for certain encroachment that may impact inspection.
Thank you.
Through the chair.
Yes. Board Member Griego?
On the one before this, it talks about definition and procedures for maintenance activities. And it talks about encroachment. In our December meeting, we had the public come in and talk about folks that are camping and using our levees to create caves and such as that. Will that issue be addressed in this definition in regards to how we address the homeless in the encampments that are forming along the levees?
So the maintenance activity definition here is also which our effort is try to differentiate between local maintenance agency to maintain flood control system. If the levee there's erosion, you need to repair, and so on. If there's an encroachment, like a camp and other private encroachment onto levee, there's a process. So this effort is try to separate this, so have a separate the definition to separate those two, and then there's a procedure, update procedure to address each. So that will not change the fact how we, when the deal private encroachment, maintain the levee. So I don't know how, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but this is not specific to address that, but it's not going to change the current procedure.
Okay. Well, it didn't really address it, but I understand what you're saying. I'm concerned that where the liability lies with the state, if camping out or destroying our levees, how is the state of California going to address that? And so I guess, well, that's for another discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. That will be broader than this. Yeah.
Okay, that's noted now in our minutes. That's a concern that will come forward at some point. It's tough. But it would seem to me that those kinds of activities on the levee are not encroachments. They are destructive and are in the way of what is flood protection. So but it's tough. It's a tough one to handle. We all live in a community where we have these tough actions that we need to take. Okay. Anyone else on this side? Mr. Countryman, do you have any comments, questions, input?
Well, I always could have comments, I guess, but not right now.
All right, let me know when you're ready. Okay. Anyone in the audience? You look so attentive. Was that a hand up to say something, ma'am? No, you're just saying hello. Okay. Anyone online? Do you have any closing remarks, sir?
No, I appreciate the opportunity.
You do?
All right. Thank you.
Well, that's very gracious of you. Thank you for the information and the PowerPoint there. So we've given us some homework as well. We've got actions coming before us in the future. So I just wanted to say, Mr. Knapp and I were talking a little bit. He was saying he had a text online. At what point does someone talk to these things? Is it after each speaker, or is it after the whole thing? So I'm just going to say that for these items, we allow the speakers to give their presentations, and then I will go to the board for questions, input, direction, and then to audience, and then to online. So it's not after each person. It's after the whole schmo. That was an inappropriate word. Okay. Then we'll move to item 5B, Advisory Committee. Recommendations. So I do know that Mr. Silva, Board Staff, Environmental Land Management Branch, the longest name, is going to talk. We have Bill Eisenstein, River Partners Planning Director, with us today. Welcome. And Lori Clamero Chu will be online. We're trying to put your photo up on the site, Lori. We'll see if that works. And then I'm certain we'll have some input from our advisory committee board members. But I will turn this over for introduction and explanation to Mr. Silva. Good morning.
Good morning, President Dolan, Vice President Vines, members of the board. Again, my name is Jamie Silva. I'm the program manager over the Environmental Land Management Branch. I'm here to introduce item 5B. So these are the advisory committee recommendations. So as we all know, the advisory committee was convened last year, and this is a culmination of the year's progress. And so we have Bill Eisenstein, Lori Clamero Chu, and also Renee Henry to go over the work group recommendations for us. All right, take it away, Bill.
There's one more person?
Yes, he was able to join us virtually.
All right, say that name again, please.
Renee Henry.
Okay, that was not on our agenda.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your attention this morning. I'm Bill Eisenstein. I'm the Director of Planning with River Partners. And there were two of these work groups, just in case that's not apparent. So in our work group, I had 3 co-leads, one of whom is in the room, Doug Brown, behind me here, and Barry O'Regan with KSN, and my colleague John Kane at River Partners. So we originally had 2 working groups that we melded into one, and so we ended up with 4 co-leads for the same working group, which worked better than you might think. And I also, before I start, just want to note that we got really excellent support from your staff, Jamie and Christine and Jordan. Were informative and helpful all the way along in our process, and so I just want to note that as well. And so our work group was entitled the Project Acceleration and Incentivization Work Group, or Subcommittee. I may flip back and forth between those 2 terms. But we were impaneled under the leadership and at the request of board members Andrews and Johnson, who also guided us all the way through and participated in our deliberations, to provide our best recommendations to this board on, just as the title of the group states, how can we accelerate and incentivize implementation of the CVFPP. I think I speak for all of us when I say that the CVFPP is an excellent planning document. We know, of course, that DWR and the board have worked hard on it. It is supported by very robust analysis, often very cutting-edge analysis conducted by DWR, and expresses the priorities of the state very well. And now I think we can all agree the challenge is how do we implement this very ambitious and well-supported vision. So we're, of course, heading toward the 2027 update. This will be 15 years after the first edition, if you will. 30 years is a common time horizon in planning, so we're approaching a halfway point of sorts of an initial 30-year period after the first plan, and I think we can all agree we're probably not where we would want to be in terms of implementation, in terms of multi-benefit projects actually getting out on the landscape. There's many excellent examples. My own organization, others have been involved in producing examples on the ground, but the vision is big, the need is very big, and we, as a state, need to accelerate our efforts at implementation. So we offer that, that was essentially our charge, is how to come up with some ideas that would help all of us move in that direction. So we met 6 times through basically between June and November of last year. We had really robust participation, state employees, consultants, nonprofits, a wide variety of participants, and the membership was essentially, continued all the way through the process. So I think as co-leads, we were really pleased with the level of participation and engagement from our members. And so we interpreted our charge, and you can see it up on the screen here. I hadn't done a PowerPoint because I thought it would be easier to read on the Word document, and that PowerPoint might actually make it smaller. But fortunately, it's a big screen, so hopefully folks can read it. And I think board members may have this printed in front of you, and that might also be easier.
We do have it printed, and
Yes.
that's helpful. So those that are looking at that from home are going to be challenged. But,
Yeah, well, hopefully they
we can
can
provide
see
the written
they can
document.
see it on their screens and zoom in as well. But we interpreted our charge as those 3 bullet points at the top there: incentivize local participation in multi-benefit flood projects, reduce or remove obstacles to more rapid implementation of multi-benefit projects, and improve the visibility and integration of these projects with other major state water and habitat initiatives related to rivers and floodplains. So I'm sure it's not news to anybody here that the state has many other objectives beyond those of this board, beyond even those of DWR, that directly touch, in fact, they cannot be achieved without significant intervention in Central Valley rivers. And so there's a need for clear coordination, integration, and so forth among all of these efforts. So we produced a set of recommendations. There's 8 of them, and basically they fall into 2 groups, which probably won't be surprising. One group is funding-related recommendations, and the other is regulatory-related. So you could imagine this as, I guess, carrot and stick type of opposite, dynamics here. So I'll just sort of talk through these one by one. Again, there's 8 total. 5 of them are funding-related. 3 of them are regulation-related. And we can just move through these. The first is pertaining to landowner incentives, and that's a basic realization that in most situations, multi-benefit projects in the floodway or along floodplains will require either a willing seller or willing cooperation, participation in some manner from landowners, and that there currently might be insufficient incentive for them to do that, and that improving incentives could provide some potential accelerant to working with more partners in the landscape. So we recommend that there be a working group formed that first focuses on identifying successfully implemented conservation incentive programs for agricultural landowners in the Central Valley. In other words, not limited to floodplain or flood issues, but more generally look at the set of incentive programs that might exist out there, and see if they have some pertinence to floodplain issues or could be tailored in some manner to the floodway and floodplains. And so exploring ways to expand those programs to enhance ecosystem function and agricultural productivity of working lands. And we also see this as including investigation of the potential to implement financial or tax incentives for landowners that establish conservation or flowage easements on their land. We did discuss, to some degree, a kind of a loose analog to maybe a Williamson Act type of situation or some kind of tax advantageous sort of status, perhaps, that land or landowners could enter to incentivize participation in, for example, a flowage easement or a conservation easement. As we all know, Proposition 13 makes property taxation issues complicated in California. It's not necessarily the case, for example, that selling an easement will necessarily reduce a landowner's tax burden given the way that Prop 13 works and how it's triggered and so forth. So there's issues that need to be thought through there, but we see that as an important item. Secondly, and bottom on your screen here, is the integration with other state initiatives. And so again, as I mentioned, there are other state initiatives, some of which are sort of enumerated here. Healthy Rivers and Landscapes Program, 30 by 30 conservation targets, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, multi-benefit land repurposing, just to cite some, that certainly touch on Central Valley rivers in very important ways. And we actually arrived at the idea that it's in the state's interest actually to really emphasize and elevate the role of the conservation strategy, the CVFPP conservation strategy, in helping to integrate and coordinate these activities and perhaps prioritize investments that some of these other programs and efforts may be making, again, that insofar as they relate to Central Valley rivers. As you all know, the conservation strategy was produced with an excellent summary and synthesis of existing science. It's updated every 5 years, as you well know, so it stays abreast of science and is the best document of its kind in terms of prioritizing some of the multi-species benefits that can come from projects along Central Valley rivers. So we would like to see it, again, elevated in importance in some of these efforts. Next slide, please. I am, like many people, I've been fighting a throat thing for about a month, so apologies for that. Our third item pertains to advance payments, and so this gets into sort of the nitty-gritty of project implementation and how local maintaining organizations and other implementers actually build projects and the kind of financing needs of some of these projects, which, as we know, can be quite expensive. We were, to be honest, pleasantly surprised to learn of the progress that DWR has made in creating advance payment programs for all flood-related DWR programs. We learned that there have been a couple of initial examples that have already occurred of DWR issuing advance payment for projects. And in case anyone's unclear, what we mean by advance payment is if there's a contracted amount for a program or a project, that there be a certain fraction of that be advanced so that the project implementer can cash flow a project much more readily, as opposed to incurring large expenses that then have to be invoiced and the implementer has to carry carry that expense until they can be implemented by the state, or excuse me, reimbursed by the state. And so we would like to simply support DWR's continued progress and ensure that that does, in fact, reach fruition to applying to all flood-related DWR programs, and also in particular as we move into the world of Prop 4 funding, that there be robust compliance with the Prop 4 expectation that there be advance payment provisions in Prop 4 related grants. Retention is another related issue. Project implementers would like to see, this is probably not a surprise, but would like to see a reduction in retention amounts. Again, that imposes a financial burden on implementers when there has to be a several-month wait, often at the end of projects, to to recover the retention amount, which is currently 10%. So it would ease that burden to reduce that number perhaps to 5%, but perhaps equally importantly, also to consider the use of retention reimbursement at project milestones rather than at the necessarily only at the very end of a project. I can say that River Partners ourselves has actually benefited from this in programs run by the Wildlife Conservation Board, where it was put into our grants that at certain project milestones, the retention, accrued retention to that point in the project could be recovered. Again, it just assists with cash flow, smoothing out the cash flow of a project. And again, with capital projects of this scale, those cash flow issues can be very serious for implementing agencies, even LMAs with rate structures and so forth, rate payers. That there can be these are substantial financial burdens that are difficult impediments often. Item 4, Proposition 4 funding, as I just alluded to, we're just now moving into a world of this money being, starting to make its way out of Sacramento and out of the state into the world of implementation. I think it was a general sentiment among our group that there is more need for educating policymakers and the interested public on simply the need for accelerated flood system investments from Proposition 4. Not only perhaps, even if the total amount is somewhat fixed now, but just to accelerate the spend out of that money and get it out into the world as quickly as possible. As we all know, flood funding, it's very episodic, just as the floods themselves are. And so when these propositions arrive, we do want to take advantage and get some projects built before the rain comes back and, until before it's too late, of course. And then item 5, the last of the funding related, relates to revolving funding opportunities. And so our proposal here is that we create a state revolving loan fund for flood risk reduction projects, which could be modeled upon and perhaps even draw funds from a revolving loan fund that FEMA initiated a handful of years ago and which still does persist to the present day, which is called the Safeguarding Tomorrow Revolving Land Fund. And so the basic idea here is that this revolving loan fund could loan money to LMAs or to implementing agencies at low interest rates for both structural and non-structural flood risk reduction actions. And then, of course, loans would be paid back by that LMA or municipality or implementing entity over time from local revenues. One nice feature of the FEMA revolving loan fund that really grabbed our attention is that it is allowable under their rules to use those funds as local cost share for projects. And that is a powerful idea, I think, from our point of view, because again, for many municipalities, particularly the more disadvantaged communities, disadvantaged LMAs, or LMAs rooted in disadvantaged communities, that cost shares can be burdensome and difficult to come up with, again, for large capital projects. So if revolving loans could qualify for that, it might help sort of thread the needle a bit on the state's understandable desire for there to be some cost share, but also to lighten the burden for the local entities to meet those cost share requirements. Regulatory related, then we have 3 more. The first, it relates to mitigation and O&M. And the notion here is to create an interagency working group, and we even suggest a sort of composition potentially of this working group where it would be including but not limited to California Department of Fish and Wildlife, DWR, the Flood Board, a representative of a Sacramento Valley LMA, a representative of a San Joaquin Valley LMA, and at least one regional conservation investment strategy proponent, and you'll see why on that last one in a second here. But that this interagency working group essentially be tasked with 2 things. One is developing a functional and expeditious process for the creation of advanced mitigation under the Regional Conservation Investment Strategy, or RCIS program, and other relevant authorities. Folks may be aware, but the Regional Conservation Investment Strategy program it is a CDFW program, and part of it was created by the legislature in statute. Part of its I guess its reason for existence, or part of its benefit to public policy and to the state, is the notion that when a regional conservation investment strategy is completed, and that does, as the name implies, create a regional conservation plan or strategy for a defined region, that it then will provide the basis for advanced mitigation, or what are known as mitigation crediting agreements, to be issued that are consistent with the RCIS. Advanced mitigation, if it can be achieved, would be an enormous help for local implementing agencies in building projects, in the sense that it would create much more predictability and much more time savings in the implementation of projects, if it were possible to go to an advanced mitigation project, purchase credits. It's somewhat similar to mitigation banking, but to purchase credits or obtain credits from an advanced mitigation project that's already been developed. It doesn't have to be developed and built, in response to the impacts of the project, but it's built in advance, and the mitigation is available and can be obtained by the project proponent. There are examples right now today of flood projects in the valley that are quite important, that are struggling with mitigation requirements and are being slowed down by mitigation requirements, and that's just delaying the time that it takes to provide these public safety improvements that are necessary in communities. It also probably, in general, does not result in mitigation that's of the same ecological quality as could be obtained by advanced mitigation projects that are well-planned, that are carefully designed, and that bring the mitigation into a more defined and coherent ecological pattern in a single project. There are currently regional conservation investment strategies that are pertinent to the flood system. Reclamation District 2092, of which River Partners is the dominant landowner, recently completed the San Joaquin Valley RCIS, which is the project area there was the 500-year floodplain of the San Joaquin River, with a few nips and tucks to make the shape a little cleaner, but basically the 500-year floodplain. There's also RCISs in the middle Sacramento region. Yolo County has one. But as of this time, the advanced mitigation process has not yet been proven out in fact. There are as of yet, no mitigation crediting agreement instruments that have been approved by CDFW. And so there's still more work to be done to actually gain the benefits of this process that were contemplated by the founding of the RCIS program. So that's one item that we hope that this working group could discuss. And of course, CDFW, as I noted, would be recommended to be in this work group so that discussion would have their full engagement. And we could arrive at a solution that would benefit our ability to build flood projects. The second item here, 6B, is developing methods for supporting and assuring functional long-term operation and maintenance of mitigation and conservation lands within regulatory floodways. So a challenge here is that when the mitigation projects or conservation lands are within the floodway, as we all know, it's difficult to fund O&M over time. And so when those projects aren't properly operated and maintained, they may grow or may deteriorate in a manner that is not consistent with the original intention or original design of the project. And that might have effects on flood conveyance capacity through a floodway, for example, and other consequences for the flood system. So that's undesirable for everybody, of course, when that sort of thing happens. And so we need to we need to identify some of those solutions or ideas for how how to support and assure that kind of functional long-term O&M. Item 7, and this one unfortunately is going to straddle 2 pages on your screen, so that's unfortunate because it's a more meaty item with a longer set of subsets here. But this relates to flowage and conservation easement integration, and so this is attempting to address the challenges that can arise when, and it's of course not all that uncommon in the flood system, where it's maybe desirable to have both flowage and conservation easements covering the same property, the same piece of ground. And there are cases now where the terms of flowage and conservation easements basically don't mix. And that there is difficulty, therefore, from a legal point of view, in applying these instruments to, both of them to the same piece of ground. But it's, I think fair to say quite important that we resolve this, because there are, as I said, many situations as we move, we're building multi-benefit projects, we're attempting to ensure ecosystem uplift in our flood system investments, and we do want those ecological improvements to have some long-term property security, let's say, in the form of a conservation easement or similar instrument. So maybe if the slide could move forward one, thank you. Yeah, we have 2 kind of approaches to this, kind of looking at it from both angles. So in subset A, you see there for flowage easements, we recommend that this may involve drafting easement language that limits the circumstances under which vegetation may be removed if modeling demonstrates to the satisfaction of the board that the proposed conservation area would not impact flows in a way that diminishes operation and maintenance of the flood system. So in other words, the challenge here is that flowage easements often are written in a manner that provides unfettered permission to remove vegetation for under any circumstances, basically on the basis of potential impact to the flood system. So the idea here is that there could be some greater specification of the conditions under which vegetation may be removed under the terms of a flowage easement. Again, with the assurance that modeling would be demonstrating to everyone's satisfaction that this would not be having negative effects on the O&M of the flood system. And then looking at it from the other direction, 7B up there at the top, for conservation easements and mitigation agreements, our notion is that this may involve drafting conservation easement language that enables lands to be managed according to an operations plan that accommodates flood control requirements for O&M, including the potential need to remove vegetation under explicitly defined circumstances. So in this case, the problem can be that the conservation easement may be written in a way that totally prohibits the removal of vegetation, and that is not, may not be acceptable from a flood management point of view. And so again, the idea here would be to identify language excuse me, within these easements that again would create a more defined set of circumstances under which it would be okay from an ecological point of view to remove vegetation. And that there might actually, it might benefit that the easement be, again, that there be a kind of an operational plan or a management plan written into the easement as opposed to the more uncompromising, unfettered language, if you will. And then the second bit here is that, and it's kind of the second sentence under 7B, relating to mitigation banks. When in the cases when those are placed in locations where flowage easements either do exist or may exist, we would argue that CDFW should consider either expanding the extent of plantings required to account for any possible future damage from vegetation removal, and or limit the amount of credits available or pricing them to reflect the risk that the conservation values may be impacted by ongoing O&M of the flood system. So in other words, the idea is, again, that realization that if there's a mitigation bank in a floodway, that it may have to be of necessity somewhat impacted and, cut back, managed by in the interests of flood system performance, but that essentially can be priced in to the mitigation agreement at the outset to allow for that kind of management flexibility. And then item 8 is efficient permitting, and this is simply a recommendation more directly to the flood board yourselves that there be effort to develop a programmatic or other efficient permitting process for floodplain and riparian restoration, consistent with other coordinated permitting processes such as the Water Board's statewide restoration general order or the federal fish agency's programmatic biological opinions for restoration. So our understanding is that there's been at least discussion internally at the flood board toward this objective, and we just want to signal our support for that and recommend that you guys persist in that effort. That's plenty from me. I think time for others to ask questions and share their thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. And for your very last item, just stay for the next item. You
Yes.
might be encouraged, but on that. You might have seen that Mr. Leaf and I had a brief conversation at 10 a.m. Board member Countryman needed to leave for another appointment, so he's offline and not with us. Just wanted to note that we may have him back, but he's not there now. So let me go to my left for comments at this point. Oh, is he gone? Okay. I would think that Mr. Johnson and Madam Andrews might have some input here. I think you're probably involved in some of these things, and I'm not going to start with my questions. I want to hear from the two of you. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Yeah, we were deeply engaged as these are being written, and so I'll limit my remarks to a little bit of context, and also just starting by thanking the advisory committee for all the work. None of these folks have this really as their day job, and it's it did require a decent amount of time and benefited from a lot of great thinking, and so we really do appreciate it. We're not here for a vote, it's a workshop, obviously, but to give you an idea of how we see this going forward over the next few months, the recommendations will shape the drafting of the flood plan itself, which now includes the conservation strategy as part of it. I think it's safe to say that it already is influencing that the drafting team has been part of this discussion all the way along. And then the recommendations in pure form from the advisory committee will be an attachment to the flood plan so that everybody can see exactly what they said. But the idea is to use them now in the creation of the plan. And we also don't want to wait for the plan. We have a number of these things that are already starting to be ongoing efforts, and we have meetings set up where we're going to be trying to advance the topics here. And so what we want to do today is, for you all to see them, the rest of the board and all of our other constituencies, get feedback, get suggestions about how to implement it. I'd be kind of surprised if there's anything that people really hate, but if you do, please let us know. And then we're going to be taking them and trying to advance them over the next few months.
I think that's great, and I think informing the board in these open forums where everyone can come is very important. I am so grateful for the work of the two of you. You've really brought this forward, and even more grateful for all the folks who have participated for the advisory committee. That's pretty amazing. That's kind of like after their other jobs, and certainly to our staff for you're marvelous moving it forward. Yeah, I'm looking at the three of you. You're great. Madam Andrews.
I wanted to note that my understanding of the formation of the advisory committee was to really influence the content of this written document, the plan, as of, I believe it began for the 2017 version. And I just wanted to note that at this point in the 2027 iteration, we recognized the fact that the plan was on a fast track and that we wanted to get input to it early as it was being formulated so that it could really be incorporated into the document. And what that's given us an opportunity to do, particularly in looking at some of the recommendations, particularly from this work group, are that we know some of the things that need to happen to move these ideas ahead, and we have an opportunity to not spend a year waiting for a final document to come out and then commenting, but actually to get moving on some of these, figure out what is, where is our energy best placed, where will that effort be best rewarded. And I really applaud the work group for what you have done in coming up with things that are truly actionable, which was our request to you. And thank you for that. And I think we've got a lot to chew on here in terms of figuring out how things actually happen. But this is the starting place, and I look forward to our discussion around how to move this ahead. Thank you.
I'll just, if I may, in response to that, just also say that I think I speak for our co-leads and everyone in the group that we're ready and willing to continue working and conversing to move things forward and actually, yeah, see this result in tangible outcomes. So
That was Mr. Eisenstein.
Yes,
Thank you for inputting that, because I was going to say, one of your recommendations is to form a work group on landowner incentives, and it seems to me it's been formed. So if the four of you want to continue, that would be remarkable, because
Yeah.
your effort has been remarkable, necessary, important. So to take that next step, we know these things need to happen. Now it is, as Ms. Andrews says, what are the things that we need to do so it does happen, instead of just saying you need to. This is
Agreed.
so important. Okay. Anyone over here? Audience in the room. Any hands up? You want to talk? Come forward and tell me who you are. Did I miss out on you? All right, you just stand there for a minute here. Don't go very far. I need to honor my board. And she even did this. Board Member Bosler, you're on, and then you.
Yeah, no, I just want to commend the work group for putting together actual recommendations, and there is a lot to chew on. I agree with that, and I think really timely, always timely to get recommendations about how to improve and how to streamline and how to accelerate our progress. And I think I'm looking forward to continuing to support and help move these recommendations along. I'm really excited about the 2027 update, because I think for the first time we're really trying to modernize the format so that it will be much more of a living document, that it will not be just having the static document that is then updated 5 years from now. It's going to have this whole presence online, and I know DWR is working really hard to think through how to make that usable, but that to me is going to be really, really powerful, I think, and even helping to integrate all these disparate actors in the system to think more comprehensively about how they can do their work.
Thank you. There is one more presenter in this panel, and I'm kind of missing out here, and that wasn't, I don't know, I got so excited with all the things that you said that need to be done and that you agreed that you're going to do them.
Thank you, President.
Mr. Kane knows that he's part of that as well, right? Okay, you need him.
Thank you, President Dolan.
You'll have to sit here while we introduce the third person, and then we'll have you come forward. Mr. Silva.
Thank you so much. Again, Jamie Silva, board staff. If we could invite Lori Clamero Chu and Renee Henri. and they will go over their subcommittee recommendations.
Oh, sure.
Good morning there. Are you two together?
Good morning.
In the same location?
No,
Okay.
no. And I think Renee is online, but, basically I offered to present this on behalf of this working group. Renee was really, has been really instrumental in a lot of the content. And so I wanted to make sure that he had an opportunity to weigh in and, add to the discussion, answer any questions. So thank you
Thank
for
you for
making him a
that. This is,
co-presenter.
this is Lori.
Yep. Hi, everybody. Laura Clamoro-Chu with Department of Water Resources. And just a little bit of background. I've been involved in the performance tracking aspect of the conservation strategy for a number of years now. And for the 2022 CVFPP update, basically that looked like a flood performance tracking system. It was a GIS-based system where we took shape files from multi-benefit projects and put them into the system, and then, kind of tried to spit out, numbers, in terms of how we were meeting our measurable objectives for the conservation strategy as it relates to natural processes, habitats, and species stressors. And a lot of the work that went into development of that performance tracking system was built on the work of the advisory committee leading into the 2022 update. A lot of very dedicated and thoughtful folks, and including Renee, of course, came up with recommendations for the 2022 update. And so when we were asked to kind of co-lead this effort for the 2027 update, we thought the best strategy would be, okay, go ahead, look at the 2022 recommendations from the advisory committee and look at what's been accomplished with those so far and look at where a lot more work needs to be done. And so that's kind of the basis for this write-up for the 2027 update, is to go back and, take a look at those recommendations and kind of rehash those and come to more specifics on what needs to be done in the near term to further those recommendations from before. Anything to add, Renee, before I kind of launch in? Okay, good. And so that gets into a little bit of this background. Again, how we track progress towards implementing the CVFPP in ways that address the conservation strategy's measurable objectives. And the attachment to this document, I believe it's attached in the write-up, is basically kind of a subjective view on how we have done at meeting those recommendations so far. So those are kind of highlighted in green. If we show, that those items are done, we can check those off the list. There's some areas that are highlighted more of a yellow color where it's like we started to work on some of those, but there's some more work that could be done, or we completed some of those, but we haven't necessarily brought them into the fold in terms of something that, we in the public can use. And then there's some highlights in orange where it's like, okay, we really, maybe we started to get at some of this, but a lot more work needs to be done. And then a lot of red highlights where it's like, okay, we haven't even started. And so we need to kind of pick those up again and see what's going on with those, see whether those still apply and really try to pick up the ball and get moving on some of that. And again, so this is just kind of a subjective view of, where we've made progress or not since the earlier recommendations. And we use this as the basis for coming up with the specific recommendations that you'll see back in the main part of the document. And Renee, you were kind of the architect of a lot of the highlights. Is there anything that you wanted to add, or did I capture that pretty adequately?
No, you did a great job. I appreciate it. I think one thing I would just add, maybe as a piece of context that comes to mind, is the amazing presentation that we just saw from the other advisory group and all of the opportunity for integration of all of these different state efforts that all rely on the flood system, on facets of the flood system. I hope you all can still hear me despite me being frozen, and it's quite a striking.
Yes,
quite a
we can,
striking
but your
position.
face
Yes, we
is,
can.
is just sitting there.
That's great. That's great. That's how I usually look.
That's true.
So I think that there
keep
was a
going.
broad recognition in the last go around on this that without an ability to actually track what's happening on the ground, not only would the conservation strategy measurable objectives not be, we would never know that we would implement them, but that there is actually a risk of creating a whole range of circumstances where they became unimplementable because of the relationship between different flavors of land designation and protection and condition. So I think I say all that because there was a lot of thought that went into those recommendations for tracking previously, that on why it was necessary to have a shared understanding of what was going on the ground and the way that land management and designation was changing that. And a lot of the possibility from that recognition has now been sort of crystallized by the other suite of recommendations that you just heard about. And so I think I just wanted to share that as context, that we thought about this before. We thought a lot of these things would be a good idea. We assembled a list of recommendations, and now there's been some time, and there's been even deeper thinking on the opportunity if we're actually able to, track what it is that we're doing on the ground and how our world is changing, and for all the different actors and state priorities that have a need related to the flood system to share a common picture of the world in that way. So just a little piece of context for the broader discussion.
Yep, wholeheartedly agree, and thank you for adding to that. And I will add that Bill is historically a tough act to follow. I think again, this is just to reinforce that we're kind of revisiting the recommendations from before. I recognize the importance of all of these recommendations from the working groups to kind of advance the interests of the flood system overall and the conservation strategy, and I for one plan to continue to be involved in that broader effort to look at a lot of these items. So if we could go back to the document, I'll go through the recommendations.
I give you a whole lot of credit in your boldness of putting forward what was done, what was not done, and what still needs to be done, and all your colorations. So identifying that, thank you.
Yep, thank you. So basically, okay, second paragraph. Again, just to iterate that this just contains some examples, again, with the highlights of where we think we've made some progress. So again, mentioning the flood performance tracking system, and then, alluding to some of the work on the Yellow Bypass Master Plan, which included development of a crosswalk between conservation strategy defined habitat types and species use of those areas that could be relevant in other geographic areas, or useful to other implementation efforts. And then, again, going into things like species-specific or flow-related data that we had said last time were kind of beyond the scope of the measurable objectives or outside of the purview of the CVFPP, and, why we didn't pursue those before and aren't prioritizing them now. And we kind of summarized in a response to comments as part of the last CVFPP, kind of how all of the working groups' recommendations from last time were addressed, just for historical reference. And then I go to the third paragraph where we talk about, continuing discussion about taking a more holistic look at the system, not limited to just multi-benefit, project footprints, but looking more broadly at where ecological improvements are occurring, and then our working group spent a bit of time talking about different data sets that would be needed to inform that bigger picture. For example, recognition in the value of continuing to update conservation strategies data sets, such as the fine scale vegetation data for the system-wide planning area on an ongoing 5-year basis. Yeah, it is just one example. So kind of launching into the recommendations, again, recommending that a system be created that would be a part of or accessible through the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan's portal that's being created for the 2027 update, and that could address the following sub-bullets. So basically, it's quantifying and in a visual way. Baseline data, 2016, that's when the conservation strategy measurable objectives were generated as part of the 2017 plan update. And also, being able to compare those baseline conditions to current conditions of the flood system in terms of actual land cover types, with a specific focus on measurable objective categories. Second bullet, doing the same, looking at baseline as of 2016 and current conditions for all of the measurable objectives categories. Third bullet, quantifying and making visual comparison of baseline and current conditions for all land conservation types as defined by the advisory committee's efforts going into the 2022 plan. That links to a document that kind of lays out a series of definitions, kind of like Renee was talking about earlier, how are lands protected? Is it conservation easement? Is it just an acquisition? What does the status of those lands mean for long-term conservation, and what counts, towards counting towards the conservation strategy's measurable objectives. And so, in addition to land cover and, tracking to the measurable objectives types, we also want to know about kind of the status of protection of those lands that we're looking at. And then finally, for the fourth bullet, looking at current and projected status of measurable objectives as an expression of the nexus between the objective categories and those land protection types in the third bullet. And Renee, did you want to add to this one?
Maybe just to say that in general, I feel like, one of the missions of this iteration of the flood plan is to integrate the conservation strategy into the actual plan, and that I think this is part of how that happens, is the ability for us to collectively analyze, visualize how things are on the ground and how they're changing.
Right. Okay, going into the second bullet, the working group spent a bit of time talking about different conservation data sets for the plan to consider as it develops its portal to ensure best available data sources that could be, accessible by the public as they kind of start to look for implementation tools and guidance, towards implementing multi-benefit projects to achieve conservation strategy objectives. And we had suggested that the subcommittee continue to discuss methodologies and data sets. What do the data sets mean and how can they be manipulated in defining both where there is physical potential to create or improve natural processes and habitat types to meet those objectives, and also how project-specific data captures these improvements as we track progress towards the measurable objectives. And then we also, in the second bullet, suggested that the subcommittee would engage with fish and wildlife regulatory agencies to see if there are any specific data sets or methodologies that they use to determine things like habitat suitability and conditions or habitat potential that the group could review and recommend that the plan consider including in this portal. Anything to add, Renee? Oh, sorry.
Just say that I think we also had a lot of discussion about how in this circumstance, we don't want to make the perfect the enemy of the good or the useful. As some of you who've worked with geospatial data sets probably know, there's You can infinitely go down the rabbit hole of needing higher levels of specificity or more up-to-date data, but that if we just took the data sources that were available and assembled them to be able to sort of interrogate with some of the questions that we've been talking around, or uh, display current conditions, that would be just a huge value add. So let's go ahead and build the framework for this and then think about how we can improve the quality or the resolution of the data once the framework gets built.
Right, absolutely. Agree that building the framework is the biggest and most important step, and the data, I think, will follow. And so for the third bullet, recommend that the plan, again, continue to update conservation strategy related data sets at 5-year intervals. Fourth bullet, recommended that the plan develop a crosswalk on how the objectives from other ongoing state and federal programs and initiatives align with those of the conservation strategy, and evaluate whether, and how those outcomes from implementation of projects or activities meet the measurable objectives. Basically kind of come up with that crosswalk of what programs are out there, are they helping to meet the measurable objectives? Kind of where's the activity, where's the money, where are the opportunities to try to capitalize on this right now? And so we suggested a next step that the subcommittee identify information about those programs to so that the plan could consider including it as part of its guidance in the portal, as part of tools that folks can use and go to look at opportunities to further implementation of their projects. And then the fifth recommendation is one that the plan, to the extent feasible, align the performance tracking efforts for the measurable objectives with any future efforts by Department of Water Resources to track other beneficial outcomes, and then relate to the department the need for tracking of other beneficial outcomes, to be available for linkage to the plan, kind of as further resources that could be possibly incorporated into the portal and serve to inform, folks that are looking to really maximize opportunities to achieve multiple objectives, again, in that shared landscape. So the next step being that the subcommittee would identify those additional benefits. Some examples that came to mind included carbon sequestration, subsidence reversal, groundwater recharge, et cetera, from the habitat created or restored as part of flood management actions. It kind of relates to that crosswalk effort in bullet number 4. And then recommend to the department how those benefits can and should be linked to the plan update process. And I think this kind of speaks to the theme of better integration of programs that was really came through in the 2022 update. Of course, we want to continue to carry that ball forward. Anything to add, Renee, before we move on?
I guess one thing,
the last recommendation. Go ahead.
one other thing I'll just put out there is, the conservation strategy, when it was developed, it was a kind of unprecedented moment in collaboration among a lot of the parties that are here engaged with interest in the flood system. There's actually a piece that was written, forget what publication it was written, but there was a journalist in the room who wrote a piece the day that we adopted it that was like about, was this, totally unprecedented in terms of having flood managers, ag, the environment, water delivery folks all together pulling in the same direction for something that they had co-created. And I think that there's been a bunch of time since then, and people move on, and there's a few of us who've been around since that moment. And this is all a long way to say, we already heard that there's great science behind the conservation strategy measurable objectives. There was a lot of thought and a lot of work that went into them. And I'm sure that we've learned things since then. this flavor of tracking will, if the measurable objectives aren't appropriate, if, somebody feels like they're outdated or there was some way that they were assembled that didn't take something really critical into account, all of this will also reveal those things too. So this is just like part of how we develop a shared understanding of the circumstance, of the utility of those objectives, of any need for them to be refined or changed through time. Like this is the basis for all of those things. I just wanted to highlight that this is not you don't have to agree with the objectives or understand them for it to make sense, to understand what's going on the ground, and to be able to revisit them through time to make sure that they continue to be useful to all of us and continue to support just like better land conditions. And as Lori was just pointing out, to integrate with all of these other objectives that we have.
Absolutely. And so I think that wraps up kind of our coverage of the recommendations. Again, the remainder of the document is the attachment with kind of the subjective thoughts on how we've done since 2022. And of course, those largely shape the recommendations as they appear now in this document for the 2027 update. And I think if nothing else, I'll turn it back over to Jane to go through public comment and board questions.
Okay, we will. I've kind of started that, so I also stalled it as well. Thank you very much, you two. Hope to see you in person next time.
Absolutely. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I thought about that.
No, we're glad you made that effort, so thank you very much for that. Okay. One little sweep here on board members before I go to the audience. Stand up and come forward. Okay, you're up. Mr. Howell, whose last name I forgot.
Thank you. I'm Hal Holland. I'm the Western Region Director for Westveld Ecological Services. I'd like to thank the board for this opportunity in this workshop, for opportunity to comment. It's clear that a lot of work has gone into this, and looking at the recommendations, there's a lot that we completely align on and agree with. So I had two small comments that I just wanted to note on the original presentation that was made. The first one was on item number 6, which was talking about mitigation and O&M. And the focus of the discussion or the recommendations was talking about MCAs, and we completely agreed that there is a tool or a time or a place for that tool, which is mitigation conservation agreements tied to the RCIS program, Regional Conservation Investment Strategies. But I would also recommend that the board consider mitigation banking in general, which was referenced, but it's not written up in that. And mitigation banking is a tool that's been approved by MOU between 7 state and federal agencies and has been a core component of providing offsets for species or wetlands mitigation for the past 25 years. And we completely acknowledge the need for more mitigation for flood control projects, and that is a tool that's been vetted out and it is very successful. Our company has delivered 1,800 acres of mitigation within floodways for flood control and other projects. And so I think it would behoove the board to consider including mitigation banking in and along with MCAs. And in that stead, there was a recommendation for an advisory committee or a working group to continue on that. And I would recommend, there is an industry association, which is CalIRBA, which is the state's Industry Association of Mitigation and Conservation Practitioners, that a representative from that board, of which I'm a board member, could provide some useful insights into how to expand that more broadly. And one further consideration with that, it was referenced that oftentimes projects or mitigation that's implemented within the floodways that don't have monies for O&M can cause long-term ramifications. And mitigation banking projects all have endowments which cover O&M. So it is a useful tool for projects that are going to be implemented within the floodway. The second thing I wanted to mention is on item number 7, which was talking about the ability of conservation easements and mitigation to coexist, and some of the challenges that come up with vegetation within the flowage easements. It was referenced that a focus be on mitigation banking, but there's been a push from the state as they've been developing MCAs to have kind of a co-equal standard between MCAs and mitigation banks. And so if we're talking about mitigation banking needs to consider certain recommendations, I would encourage that MCAs are considered equivalent in that. And then some further clarification on the bullet points. There was a recommendation that maybe CDFW encourage the pricing to reflect the risk of vegetation being removed. The state does not take an active role in setting pricing on mitigation. That is done by the practitioners. So there needs to be a way, if you're considering putting pricing in, that's done more with the people who are developing the projects than relying on the state. And then finally, I would also encourage, there are a variety of different types of restoration projects that can occur within the jurisdiction of the board. Some of the projects are done where there is jurisdiction but behind the levees. Some of them are done inside the levees but are backwater systems, and then some of them are flow-through systems. And there's a different risk of vegetation affecting roughness calculations and the need for vegetation removal. So I would recommend, rather than kind of a binary type of recommendation, to work with CDFW on how to approach it. A lot more nuance needs to be incorporated within that consideration.
I have a question. You spoke of an organization that I actually have never heard of, but maybe I have, CalURBA?
Yes.
What is that? California?
The URBA is Ecological Restoration Business Association.
Oh, okay, I got the initials right. Shouldn't get all of that. So you'll give us a contact for that?
Absolutely. I can give you Sarah Johnson is the executive director, and you could look up their website. And I can also make sure that I get her in touch with you.
Okay. It's an organization that is focused on California?
Yeah, it's California Industry Association.
CalURBA, okay. Everybody's got that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Overwhelmed at all of your ideas and interests and desire to move forward. Are you going to talk? Oh, okay. Anyone else here in our lovely audience? No. I see some familiar faces. You are obviously not shy. What's going on here? Okay, you're going next. All right, I got her. Now or after? Okay.
Okay. Megan Nagy, Deputy Manager at Reclamation.
You can do this if you want.
Yeah, the height thing from Hal is quite different here.
You think, yeah.
Megan Nagy, Deputy Manager for Reclamation District 108. I just want to say that was the first time I'd heard the recommendations that Bill had recommended, and they're fantastic. We're fully supportive of the recommendations that you presented. And, I think one of the things that we're paying a lot of attention to right now in our region in particular is making sure that the work that we're doing as part of Healthy Rivers and Landscapes is incorporated into part of the conservation strategy. That is key for our region, the successful implementation of that. And any even inadvertent way to kind of contradict or go ahead of Healthy Rivers and Landscapes could be detrimental to our region. And we think it 100% aligns with the goals of the conservation strategy and is frankly, a lot of energy has already been put into the details. We've had a lot of work with our landowners. We're really working hard on a ground up implementation approach, so landowners come on board from the beginning, and so we want to make sure that all of that good work is incorporated and we can continue to work together.
Thank you. Board Member Johnson?
I'll be quick. I just wanted to
Take your time.
speak up briefly since there wasn't any other comment on the second presentation. It is the type of thing where once we get into the sub-bullets, it can get pretty technical pretty quickly, and you see, eyes glaze over and or think, we'll leave that to the people who are technically engaged in it, but it's also one of the more important things that we do. And I've been an advocate for, since I've been on the board, to have the tracking be a big part of the plan. And I just want to say that, and I think it's worth all of us lifting up that part of the recommendation. It's the type of thing that's sometimes hard to fund and always goes a little bit more slowly and less aggressively than it could, but it's also incredibly cheap compared to the billions of dollars that we're spending on projects, and worth the time and the effort and the money to do right, so that we know we're spending the bigger dollars correctly.
Yes. Well said. We know it needs to be done. We just got to tracking to get it done instead of talking about what needs to be done. Let's get it done. I know that has a bit of naivety to it because there's not a lot of money floating around there to give to us, but we'll work on that. Anyone else? Ms. Bosler, you look like you're thinking. Okay. Over here.
Just thinking about advance payments.
Yeah. I would love to see these come forward in some blockage so that we can have a really robust discussion about some of these ideas, because yes, advance payments has been something that we've heard from a lot of organizations that can do things, but they don't sit on a whole bunch of money to pre-finance it and then wait to be reimbursed, and so they can't do it. And it's a shame, because they have connections with landowners and they have the ability to do it, but to find that money that they don't have is necessary. Aha. Member Andrews.
Thank you. I just wanted to call out in terms of the second presentation, which, as Brian said, is really important to understand what the result is of all of the money being spent on projects in terms of how well it achieves conservation strategy objectives. The recommendations around interaction with other programs that the state and feds are engaged in is a very difficult territory from my perspective. And I'm not even sure how we as the board help in having those communications. But I just wanted to call it out as a place where the subcommittee probably has limited ability to actually sort those issues out and make changes so they can help direct us in terms of the conversation that may need to happen at the state and federal level.
Well said. It is a challenge, but we ought not to backtrack on it. We do what we can.
I just have a point of view on that. I mean, I think that it's enough and it's important to at least raise the issue. I agree, it's different to figure out how to really integrate these strategies, but I don't even know that we've really always had that in the forefront. And I think that we should. And I have seen more things from the administration about how do these two strategies integrate, and I think that we should do the same here with the statutory report. And then, of course, we'll have a new governor who will have new strategies.
I was just quickly going to add that I know it was in the interest of, both of the working groups to have kind of a crosswalk where a lot of those connections are at least laid out so that folks who are interested in exploring these connections, honestly, a lot of it is opportunity driven. It's like, where is this money? And was, honestly kind of the impetus for how we've started to implement with, kind of integrate specific programs within DWR to achieve mutual objectives on the landscape. It's like, oh, you've got money? We can work together in this way. And so if we just had, a crosswalk where folks are like, okay, we're on board and doing these kinds of things. Where is the money that can help us achieve these things? And we could provide that as guidance. so that, folks at least know where the resources are, or we can kind of, hold hands as we lead them to those resources. That was kind of an ask of both these working groups, at least just put it in a crosswalk so we can see where these connections are. So hopefully, I don't know how useful it would be. I guess it depends on how deeply folks dig into the guidance, but it was requested.
Thank you.
Thank
That
you.
was Lori. Thank you. Each topic brings forward something else. Any more in the audience? Any hands up? No hands up.
Chair Dolan, this is Bill Eisenstein again. If
Yes,
I
sir.
could just acknowledge one other person. I've received a couple of nice compliments in these comments, and I just want to remind everybody that I'm just here representing the work of several people, but one of whom I didn't acknowledge is my colleague Andrea Clark, who actually was very helpful in drafting the recommendations around the flowage and conservation easement language, and so I meant to acknowledge her in the verbal comments and hadn't done so yet. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Always good to have her. Yeah, competent attorney for all this language, easements and conservation. We have to figure out a way they can go together. They're both very important. You can start with my backyard if you want. It's too little. Okay. Wow. All right. This will recur in some fashion. This is not, thank you very much for all these ideas. We're just full of them. We're buzzing on things. We want to get it done. We'll see you in a year. No. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't actually have the authority, but I'm going to say you already have your subgroups. So please keep going. You've got 3 of our staff that will help you because they're as amazing as you all are. And I just really appreciate the efforts that you're making. And what Megan Nagy said is really true. She's clearly operates in an area where I somewhat live, a little bit to the north, but the Sacramento River area is kind of my backyard and things I've paid attention to for longer than I'm going to tell you. Because I started when I was 10. And they really have a connection with the landowners. And what has occurred in the last decade is landowners in the Sacramento River area really moving forward to help create projects and not be barriers. So really congratulate them on that. That was a big step because I remember when it was, leave me alone. Not anymore. Now it's, how can I help? Which is great. Okay. I'm not ready for a break. Is anyone else ready for a break? All right. Well, let's take Brian Johnson 5 minutes.
See you in 10.
Okay, thank you.
The board meeting reconvenes after that brief break.
4.5 minutes.
Yeah. Good job. We are at item 5C, a forum for restoration and multi-benefit projects. This is an informational briefing, and our staff members, Jamie Silva and Jordan Robbins, will provide that. I'm looking forward to this. Who do I call on first?
Thank you, President Dolan.
I usually think it's women before men, but that's okay. I'll let you go.
I'll be sure
Good morning.
to pass that baton.
Still morning. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Again, Jamie Silva, Environmental Program Manager who oversees the Environmental and Land Management branch here at the board. And so I'm presenting item 5C. So it is a forum for restoration and multi-benefit projects, which will highlight some key initiatives that board staff will be implementing this year. Next slide, please.
I like that word, implementing.
Yes, that is the key word.
Yep.
So just a presentation overview. We will be providing a brief introduction to the Cutting the Green Tape areas of improvement that we have identified, goals and objectives to address these areas improvements, and then we'll be going over a proposed timeline and next steps for us. Next slide, please. So Executive Order N8220 that was issued in October 2020. So it directed the establishment of the California Biodiversity Collaborative. So that is comprised of the California Natural Resources Agency in consultation with the California Department of Food and Agriculture and the California Environmental Protection Agency and other state agencies to bring together other governmental partners, California Native American tribes, experts, business and community leaders, and other interested parties from across California to protect and restore the state's biodiversity. So in doing so, it's to increase the pace and scale of ecological restoration and stewardship by amending and streamlining various government processes. So this could be achieved by exploring opportunities such as programmatic approaches like CDFW has accomplished by the statutory exemption for restoration project, as well as the State Water Resources Control Board statewide restoration general order. But it also can be achieved by drafting templates and process improvements or clarifications for internal agency review and aligning with streamlined processes used by other agencies. Next slide, please. So board staff have identified these key areas of improvements, which we believe are achievable within the near term that are aligned with Cutting the Green Tape initiative, as well as other state and federal initiatives that were highlighted previously from our other presenters. So our first area of improvement that we have identified is that our California Code of Regulations, Title 23, lacks specificity regarding restoration. So our current regulations don't define restoration, mitigation, or conservation banks, or even multi-benefit projects within this perspective of restoration. The second area of improvement that we've identified are revisions to outdated board permit conditions, which should be re-examined as not all conditions apply to these type of projects. So board staff would be looking at how permit conditions could better align with long-term management plans compared to conservation values created and enhanced by restoration and mitigation projects. And so third, as we have heard from our previous speakers as well, we have seen the inherent conflict between flowage and conservation easements for projects that are planned within the adopted plan of flood control. So, there is a lot of work that needs to be done in order to resolve this effort and more coordinated and collaborative effort. So by addressing these issues, a board will be modernizing its regulations and processes to advance these type of projects in a more streamlined manner. So we will be using a three-pronged approach to address each area of improvement, which will be described in more detail as we dive into our goals and objectives. Next slide, please. So firstly, board staff will be drafting and submitting updates to Title 23 to the Office of Administrative Law as a rulemaking package. So these regulatory updates would include updating our definitions under Article 2, Section 4, and standards under Article 8. By reevaluating Article 8 standards to determine whether new standards could be drafted or existing ones revised to evaluate restoration as a dynamic and fluid system versus an encroachment by encroachment basis would allow for more streamlined technical review. This would require staff to re-examine the review of a restoration project on a more holistic manner instead of evaluating a project based on what encroachments are proposed. Next slide, please. So vegetation standards that are included within Article 8 currently does not include current knowledge of invasive species that are currently an issue within the system. So for types of vegetation allowed on levees requires updating to better align with forward thinking that is occurring on the national scale, such as the National Levee Safety Guidelines, practices for vegetation management on levees, and nature-based solutions. So we've seen a shift that would consider natural and nature-based features such as vegetative planting benches and riparian forests to provide shaded riverine aquatic habitat being more incorporated into levee improvement projects. As we balance flood risk reduction objectives with nature-based features, through the planning and design phases of levee improvement projects, the board's vegetative standards should keep up with those practices. So additionally, invasive plant species research and monitoring has identified new species that were not previously considered when non-permissible plant species on levees were drafted as part of Title 23. So incorporating the best available science positions the board to provide the most up-to-date research and opens the door for more collaboration with entities like the California Invasive Plant Council. Next slide, please. And I will hand over the presentation to Jordan.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Hello, President Dolan, Vice President Valians, and board members. My name is Jordan Robbins. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the board. I'm also tasked with the special assignment of restoration projects here. So some of our other goals and objectives include procedural updates, such as re-examining permit conditions for revision or to create new ones. For example, current standard conditions that are applied to these types of projects are for orchards, landscaping, and riparian planting projects. Additionally, coordinating with the Army Corps of Engineers Section 408 Division for any streamlining opportunities within their letter of permission process, seeing if there are any coordination improvements between boards and Army Corps staff, and evaluating any streamlining opportunities during their NEPA review, such as Section 7 or Section 106 consultations. Next slide, please. Furthermore, we want to evaluate resolutions to conflicting easement language for these projects by revising language to be consistent with both flowage and conservation purposes. For example, reevaluating a standard board permit condition that establishes the board's ability to exercise discretionary right to remove vegetation that pose a risk to flood facilities and increase the flood potential after a high water event. Revisions to standard conditions in collaboration with banking agencies may address concerns that local maintainers could impact the habitat conservation on a bank property. Also, establishing a framework that clearly defines roles and responsibilities in long-term management plans and bank enabling instruments. And coordinating and sharing information with regulatory and banking entities will help with this goal. Lastly, board staff will be participating as a non-signatory reviewer for banking projects within the Army Corps' interagency review team. This will increase coordination between board staff and other reviewing agencies on projects with Army Corps 408 and board interests. This will hopefully provide opportunities to address potential easement conflicts and compatibility for projects sooner rather than later. Next slide, please. Thank you. Other future board activities, which are separate and apart from this effort, include removing or modifying rock revetment, which is a priority identified in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. Also, implementing board advisory committee recommendations. And as Jamie mentioned earlier, exploring other programmatic approaches board staff can evaluate for projects that may be similar to what other state agencies have done, such as CDFW's statutory exemption for restoration projects and Water Board's general orders for restoration projects. Now I'll hand the presentation back to Jamie. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. So here you'll see a proposed timeline of how board staff will achieve these near-term goals. So we will be performing a series of outreach and engagement activities to understand the challenges as restoration practitioners navigate the board's permitting process and from our regulatory partners whom we closely coordinate with. So as we receive feedback from the larger community, you'll see that the procedural changes is an iterative process that should always be considered by board staff. We want to continuously approve and streamline internal processes that make sense for these type of projects. Next slide, please. Excuse me?
You were talking about this slide, number 10, making sense?
So could you go back one slide, please?
Oh, did I go forward too much?
No.
All right, never mind.
Yeah, so, as I was pointing out, having a three-pronged approach. But for our internal procedures, you'll see there that it's a circle. So, we feel that procedural changes by reevaluating some of our internal processes, like looking at board permit conditions, should be a continuous track while we get some feedback from restoration practitioners, because we definitely want to understand the issues prior to us making these changes. So really engaging the community at large and reevaluating and considering their feedback should always be a continuous process. Next slide, please. So, like I pointed out, our next steps are to schedule a series of listening sessions that are targeted towards each individual topic. So our regulatory updates, our procedural updates, and easement resolution. And you'll see here on this slide, there's a bunch of different regulatory agencies, nonprofits, and these are only but a few that we highlight. So we definitely want to invite all the restoration community to provide some feedback for us. So we, instead of the flood board, imposing regulatory and procedural changes and the restoration community reacting to them, we want to hear from them in the community to directly refine our processes to address the hurdles they are facing in implementing restoration and multi-benefit projects within the adopted plan of flood control. Next slide, please. So in addition to our listening sessions, board staff have been invited to speak at the Army Corps of Engineers SBK Mitigation Bank Interagency Review Team monthly meeting to discuss the board's jurisdictional authority, our review and permitting process, and speak on the coexistence of flowage and conservation easements. So that will be later this year in the spring. And in the fall, board staff will be coordinating to revise our internal procedures, begin drafting our rulemaking package, and continue to have discussions with regulatory agencies to discuss easement resolution further. Next slide, please. And with that, that concludes our presentation, and we'll take any board comments and questions this time.
Okay. Thank you. Board comments and questions. Vice President Villines.
Thank you for that. That's great. It seems aggressive, but great. Question for you. How many listening sessions do you kind of have a framework for that? Are they going to be in person, Zoom, combo? What are you thinking of?
Yeah, so I think we're going to be implementing those listening sessions in a hybrid format. We do realize that in-person discussions are preferred, but we realize that there are limitations to those that are far away from our Sacramento headquarters. So we want to make sure that these listening sessions are accessible. So we want to schedule these first ones for each individual topic, but obviously this is a continued conversation. So, as needed, we will be scheduling more.
Member Griego.
Thank you. So I'm curious, when you talk about setback levies, of course, I'm going to think about my own backyard of the Bear River and the Feather River levee setback. And I think about the things that we did in those specific areas of flow easements, mitigation areas, how that when water rose into those areas, how would, the flows be affected? And so what we're doing today, how does that affect anything that would be in those setback areas? I think the only improvement I think we could have done at that point, but wasn't really being done at that time, was putting aside land for tribal, ceremonial, cultural lands for them. Maybe that's something that will happen in the future. But other than that, would this have any effect on these setback areas?
I think for planning setback levy projects, it definitely requires a lot of collaboration and coordination. There's room for opportunity. Setback levies are really one of our prime projects that we see to expand the floodplain, expand restoration opportunities. Sorry. But in terms of doing more, I feel like there's always a continued conversation with regulatory agencies as well as the project proponent itself. So, identifying issues ahead of time, I think would really streamline the process and you have more continued conversations because we see that, as project proponents go through the permitting process, they're getting hit with these issues on the latter end. So having that coordination and collaboration ahead of time, I think will streamline and advance these projects a lot faster.
Anyone else?
Yeah, no, I just want to say kudos for listening and identifying that this should be a continual improvement process, and just really excited that you guys are moving forward on this work, and want to be as supportive as I can as a board member. So.
Me too. I think you speak for the board in that regard. If you ever create some kind of issues there, you've got 7 folks that are willing to maybe get the conversation moving a little faster. Right? Let me ask this. Maybe it's just pie in the sky. We've got our regulations within Title 23. We're not Title 23. We're many divisions of Title 23. Is there a way that we can look at the processes that we might be able to implement and analyze and maybe test those first before we start revising our different divisions in Title 23? There has to be, my thought is that there has to be a way to have a conversation with the Army Corps over some of these issues that could be conversational, and then we could pass maybe an action or a resolution or something like that without this massive redoing of Title 23.
Yeah, I think, in this approach, we've kind of identified within buckets of, internal procedures, what we can reevaluate for our review, but also within the rulemaking process. And that's why we really want to invite our regulatory partners like Army Corps of Engineers, like you have identified, to see if we can streamline processes like our concurrent reviews. But in terms of Title 23 regulations, I think that still is required because we don't recognize restoration and conservation and mitigation banks. These regulations were drafted how many odd years ago. So I think bringing to the forefront of and reflective of what's really going on and what's needed within the system, I think should be considered.
No, I understand that, but our regulations are clearly dated. They do not address in any way restoration, which is important, it's ongoing, and it's needed. So we can only apply a restoration project against what exists as grossly outdated. And a restoration project is not the same as a concrete levee.
Right. And so,
it could be a setback levy, and then you have restoration with it. But I think many of us, and certainly you, are aware of projects that were told, take this path, and you went the whole path, and when it got to the end, it's like, no, that's not the path you take. And it's just, I'm assuming in your listening sessions, I can see some of these groups you're going to talk to, you're going to quickly come up with a list of what the barriers are, and then you'll know how we need to change.
Yeah, I think our experience as board staff when we're evaluating these restoration and multi-benefit projects, we have heard from from restoration practitioners kind of the challenges and hurdles, but I think that's really is the point of these listening sessions, because we really want to understand from their perspectives, as they're navigating our board permit process, to really make sure that our changes to regulations as well as our internal procedures are meaningful to make sure that we advance these projects.
Here. Yeah. That's our goal. I'm glad that's happening. I would hope that we could schedule some regular updates for how this is occurring and ways that we can help. Because it's not just our processes. There's a few other governmental entities within our lovely state of California that have theirs as well that create a blockage.
Yeah, so on one of the slides on our goals and objectives, we did identify coordinating with our federal partners, the Army Corps of Engineers, because as the non-federal sponsor, obviously some of these projects are federally interested and need Section 408 permission. So
Or not.
Or not. So, you know.
I think the first step is it really necessary before you start through that whole process? Because I've seen a couple that spent 3 years on that, and then it was like, we don't need to do this. Send us a letter. Maybe send a letter before the third year.
So, you know, the Army Corps of Engineers obviously has their own technical standards and what they review on their projects as well. But on the environmental scale, you know, coordinating with their staff and seeing if we can be of assistance in order to streamline federal review, whether that's through programmatic agreements with the State Historic Preservation Officer, you know, speaking to the other fish and wildlife agencies. You know, we heard previously from Bill Eisenstein from River Partners, you know, if we can parlay things like the programmatic biological opinions that Fish and Wildlife Service and NIMS has, you know, there are streamlining pathways that do exist. So, you know, speaking to our Army Corps federal partners and seeing if there's any room for improvement in their review is definitely a goal and objective for us.
Or we may want to bring to them our suggestions for them to look at, yeah. We've seen the reports and the information from the organization Sustainable Conservation focused on certain kinds of permit processes and how to move that forward. So I'm sure you've got them on the list. I'm sure you're going to talk with them about
yes, Katie
how that
has,
can be reflected in what we do as well.
Yes, Katie Hedelman from Sustainable Conservation has really been a resource for us. Okay. So yeah. We definitely would like to speak to their folks as well as CalERBA, as Hal had mentioned, to lean on their technical expertise and their experiences to help shape our processes.
Through the chair.
Yes, ma'am. Member Griego.
So with, we're hearing through our legislative updates that there's been budget cuts to the Army Corps of Engineers. Do you see that as a challenge to try to work with the Corps on these particular matters?
Well, yes, but we'll do it.
Yeah, I think budgetary constraints and staff availability to review projects is always definitely going to be a challenge for us, as non-federal sponsors, but I think that the communication and that we have had with staff, I feel that they are very supportive of trying to get restoration and multi-benefit projects on the ground faster. We have these other statewide initiatives. There's the 30 by 30 that was mentioned, Healthy Rivers and Landscapes. And even for us, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, because we're looking for opportunities for floodplain expansion. So, while we may be facing a statewide budgetary constraint, there are these programs and policies that are a priority. So, working with them, and we're hopeful that we can make some progress.
Do you think there will be a day where the Corps would see some value of delegating some of their authority to this board in regards to some of the actions that we do anyway?
I think there are some ongoing discussions on that, but there would be others more suited to answer that question.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, of course.
Is that a compliment or not?
It depends how he takes it. I just meant that was a good answer. A good non-answer.
Chair Dolan, I have 2 questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Will you be considering and will you have a stream for potential law changes as well.
I mean, I think anything's on the table. You know, these are only the near-term objectives that board staff have identified. You know, with our limited resources, we feel that these 3 approaches are really achievable within the next few years. But in terms of legislative change, you know, I think we can garner more support from our administration, from our resource agency, parent agencies. So, you know, I think we should consider legislative change to advance these kind of projects. But yeah, for now, we're focusing on these approaches.
And then just one other comment. I recently was able to go to a seminar where there was some presentations from these new, I think they're called digital fellows or some kind of fellows that are sponsored by the Office of Digital Innovation. And there's somebody at Caltrans right now, a fellow that's like specifically working on all of the conflicting issues in the regulations right now. And I just thought it was an interesting like test project, and there might be some things to learn from what they're doing as they're looking at their body of regulations and how there's a lot of conflicting pieces of it. And they're actually, I think, using some artificial intelligence tools to help in that analysis. I'm happy to follow up.
Would you please? Yeah. Yeah. Shoot, we can learn from Caltrans. They can learn from us.
They might have more regulations than us.
You think it's possible? I like that the 2 of you are really smiling. We're giving you more suggestions. You've done a great presentation, laid out the issues. And any way we can assist with the listening sessions and the other things that you need, please call on us as well.
We would appreciate any kind of board attendance. You know, I think your perspective and your experience really garners feedback and input into these listening sessions. So
okay. Maybe you can let us know when they occur and see if that works.
Yeah.
Yeah. You might have noticed we all like to talk. But we like solutions as well. Okay. Anyone in the audience want to comment on this presentation? Aha. We have some more River Partners folks here, including the president. And did you hear the presentation of how we're going to just clear up all the issues of restoration permitting? Okay.
Hello, board. My name is Gavin Poor. I'm with Solana County Water Agency. I'm a fluvial geomorphologist by trade, and I work in Puda Creek mainly, so it's very close to home here. If anyone wants to come and visit our projects, I'd be happy to give a tour. And I'm just kind of here to help sort of motivate you all. All of this talk has been very hopeful and very positive, I think. And I just want to say that Puda Creek has faced many struggles with permitting throughout the years, and in the past I think it's been a lot of fighting. We fight with the board for encroachment permits, we fight with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for their 408 permit, we fight with CDFW for their permit, but slowly but surely I feel as if everything is becoming a more working with a collaboration, if you will, instead of a fight. So to have Central Valley Flood Protection Board start to come over onto the side of restorationists and really see how each system is, working in their own regard, and having very specific, how do I put this? But having a very specific look at each and every permit that comes through, and recognizing that restoration is a thing that helps us put towards U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that, hey, maybe this isn't exactly needed on certain creeks. Maybe we need to relook at certain hydrology on systems. Puda Creek in particular, the flood conveyance was designated before Monticello Dam was even put in. And Monticello Dam was not considered as a flood control structure, even though it created perhaps the world's largest retention pond and largest peak reduction from about 80,000 CFS down to only 20,000 CFS. But the minute we try and come in and do a restoration project, they say, well, are you maintaining the 80,000 CFS capacity of the channel? And it's like, that flood does not happen anymore. So anyways, it's very heartening to hear that, you know, we're all working towards a much better resolution. So anyways, thank you.
Well, I would hope that you change your wording from fighting with us to knowing that we're going to cooperate with your projects.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Towards cooperation.
Right. No, that's definitely our goal and direction. So no more fights. You can fight with my brother. I just want you to move it down to here. I don't know. You're fine.
Good afternoon. Megan Nagy again. This time I'm representing the California Central Valley Flood Control Association and Regional Flood Management Planning. We are the lead for Mid-Upper Sac region. So taking a lot of this in. So a lot of the conversation actually reminded me of a lot of the conversations we had with your staff regarding system improvements and how system improvements aren't recognized in the regulations, and they didn't quite fit. So a lot of this was reminiscent, I guess, of that. We've taken a lot of those conversations, and I think we've piecemealed some improvements into the various Title 23 updates that are coming forward, whether it's the fee updates or the technical standard updates, a lot of those. So I would just encourage that as we move forward with this, we all do a review of those recommendations that came out of that group and make sure between all of these Title 23 recommendations that we're also capturing the recommendations that came out of that group. And again, I said they are coming out in various forms, but I don't know that we've done a comprehensive review to make sure everything has been incorporated. But I would also encourage from a listening session, I noticed there were no local maintaining agencies on that listening session slide. And as partners for the Flood Control Association as well as regional plans, I would encourage a listening session with those of us that have to maintain the system be included as part of that. And I do have to say your staff is always really, really good at coordinating with us. So that might have just been an assumption up there, but I didn't want to leave that without saying it. A lot of these recommendations are really good, but it's going to be threading a needle, right, to make sure that what improvements are done to the permitting don't get transferred as burdens later to those of us that have to operate and maintain the system. And so we just need to be really cognizant of every decision that's made to make sure that the local maintaining agencies are considered. We don't have the capacity to take on O&M of restoration sites that are adjacent to our levees, and oftentimes these sites are constructed and then there's no O&M entity left to take that on in the long term. So just be really mindful of kind of that whole life cycle approach and not just the front permitting approach. Let's see. As far as the Corps' authority for delegating permitting, I know there's talk about it on a national level. We are advocating for that. We would love for you to take on more of the Corps permitting, so we are happy to support any initiative on that front. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Just to allay your concern and your suggestion, I heard our staff say that that list of listening sessions was just an idea and not a comprehensive list. Okay. So you brought that up. I wrote on there that I needed to tell you about the RFMPs and the local agencies, but now you've done that, and I've now done that. And see, they're nodding, yes. Any cooperation we could get from the federal agencies that really have had restrictions in their funding to become a partner with us. We are the partner with the Army Corps, so we can take on some of those burdens and move these things forward.
Love that.
I've said that. We've got the smallest staff in the state of California, but they're also really good, really good. and dedicated. Okay. Hello.
Raise the microphone again. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it probably takes an engineer to lower the stand, so we'll get a step stool for Megan next time. I need it too, so don't. Yes, sir.
Hal Holland with Westerveld Ecological Services again. Mostly I just want to vocalize support. I appreciate the board and staff in particular really taking on this issue. As a practitioner who's working on restoration projects that are mitigation projects involving all the agencies that were listed on that slide, it's really critical to get the Central Valley Flood Protection Board staff engaged early in the process. Oftentimes, the involvement historically has only come at the permit issuance, which is at the very tail end of the project, and it hasn't necessarily allowed those other agencies to think about the requirements. So early, getting this formalized and your participation engaged early. I would also encourage, as much as it's important to have these be listening sessions, what we've been experiencing is education sessions for those agencies as to the work that you do. We've come across where they weren't aware that you even did hydrologic modeling prior to issuing permits, or what you're really intending when you talk about vegetation clearing. And I think the final point is, and I think anyone that's a restoration practitioner is, we're viewing the work that we're doing as going back to a natural system, something that predated the levee systems and any of the flood control, which should be compatible. And there are times where we do need encroachments of certain things, so temporary irrigation that's going to go in and come out. But I think that's different than holistically what we're trying to implement on the site. So anything we can do to improve this process, highly appreciate it and commend the work that's being initiated here.
And we'll continue to need your input and assistance as well, and with all of the folks that were here before. Where have you been? Good morning.
Good morning, board. It's a pleasure to be here. Julie Rettner, I'm the president of River Partners and Reclamation District 2092, which is a local maintaining agency in the San Joaquin Valley that also works with Stanislaus County to create the Mid-San Joaquin RFMP. I want to congratulate the board on all of this work and commend you for taking on this topic of improving the permitting regulations. I wanted to reflect that in our time at River Partners in developing habitat restoration projects in the floodway, permitting them, working with others to permit their projects, taking a look at this approach can open up a lot of opportunities in combining or integrating the way that our water system works. What we've found is that some of the most important flood system improvements that we can advance, and the scale with which we can advance them is dependent upon combining water supply improvements, water quality improvements, ecosystem improvements, and flood risk reduction improvements all together. And you have an opportunity as you go through these listening sessions to work with other state agencies, federal agencies in those different water sectors and make sure that we're considering the influence of all of these revisions on how we can welcome those integrated perspectives into the flood system. So I look forward to participating in listening sessions, participating in this work moving forward with you all in partnership, and hope to bring along folks from different components of our water sectors to do just that. So thank you for your good work.
You did say that floodwaters can improve recharge as well. You did say that. I heard you say
Floodwaters can improve recharge, can't they? Yes,
Exactly.
and water quality in our streams and creeks and rivers.
Right.
Thank you.
We'll get there. Thank you. Anyone else? You're getting some awards there. Anyone else? Okay, don't use the word fighting anymore, okay? We're not going to fight with you. Just come to us and we'll figure this out. And I would love to see. I'd love to. Well, yeah. Well, we've got a new leader, so maybe it will change. But I'll help you with. I'd love to be on that one. I want to see Puda Creek as well. So, okay.
Good morning, board. My name is Gustavo Cruz. I'm also with Solano County Water Agency. And I just wanted to say an observation from today and from my time as well being engaged with your staff on YVCS and also participating in the Lower Sacramento Delta North RFMP. Sorry, that's a mouthful always. It's very nice to hear all this talk about collaboration because, I mean, you've heard from so many people just today what it means when we can align so many different goals And ultimately, it's breaking down these silos that is going to just pay huge dividends in the future. And I know so many people in this room really care about that. There's so many issues. I mean, like dealing with unhoused populations. There's so many issues that 20, 30, 40 years ago, we weren't really talking about in the same breath, but now we are. And I think that's a testament to all the great work that's happening at the state level, the local level, and the federal level, even with a lot of their, constraints that they have. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And hopefully you could add to that, we didn't just talk about these things we want to do. We're just very eager. We're on implementation. We know the direction that needs to be done, and we could talk about that until the next century, I suppose, but instead we want to figure out how do we take what we know and put it on the ground with, our 3 staff that's going to do it, so. But you got 7 people that are right behind you, so if you ever see a barrier, you just let me know, and then you've got, the whole audience, and which was bigger earlier, so. I just look at the volunteers who've done the work on the advisory committee, and that's just been amazing under our leaders of Andrews and Johnson. So it's great. Any hands up? Got no hands up these days, huh? Board members? I'm looking at my agenda, and there's nothing, well, yes, there are some things on it. So I think we'll move to the little business stuff here. Do you have any closing remarks?
No, but I would just like to thank the board for their time and input and leadership as we embark on this journey.
Right back at you. We're trying to do our job. Let us know how we're doing. Yeah, thank you very much. All right, our next item, board comments and committees. Andrews, anything?
We have our first advisory committee meeting following the presentation of recommendations, so that's coming up very shortly on the 24th.
Yep. And that's both in person and online. We do that now, don't we? Virtual
I think
and
that's where
in-person.
we ended up, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Some of us like to actually see that. Okay. Ms. Bosler?
I don't think I have anything to add. I've been continuing to work with DWR about the financing chapter on the flood plan, and that's been really helpful. And just talking about some of the messages that we want to come out of that and how to be the most effective and really communicating what the state of play is around the regions and the infrastructure needs and the O&M needs that are continue to have very large funding gaps. So
yep.
We are working on that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, so grateful for you. Member Johnson.
Just to mention, I attended with President Dolan and Chris Floodplains Forward anniversary that I thought I was going to look at some birds and see a nice sunset and old friends and all that. And those things were all there, but it also turned into a pretty substantive discussion about how to make things go a little bit faster and more effectively, and happened to include leadership from almost all of the state and federal partner agencies anyway, and Secretary Crowfoot and several deputies, including the new director at DFW. And so I'm looking forward to following up on that and seeing what we can do with that momentum.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think they said they wanted to have another gathering of that relatively soon and not just make it an annual event. There's a concern across the board to actually move forward with the things we know are necessary and not wait for someone else to do it. So we'll do it. You have a comment? Anything? Member Grego?
Yeah, I'd just like to announce that the Yuba Water Agency did a mini documentary this February 20th at 6:05 PM. It marks the 40th anniversary of the flood of '86. And myself and Joe Countryman are in that documentary. And I'll just, if I can just kind of paraphrase what he said, is that the flood of '86 changed the way we look at flood control from Marysville to Bakersfield, and the responsibility and liability that the state of California has in regards to flood protection. And so this mini documentary is called "The Day the Levee Broke," and it's 23 minutes long. It's got some really great, stuff in it from history perspective and why that failure occurred and what was behind all of that. So if you have an opportunity I asked our, executive director to show this, maybe at a future workshop. So you're going to find a place for 23 minutes. Okay, great. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I think one of our future workshop meetings is to see Marysville and the levee there. So I know where the theater is, where these things show. It changed the law. It changed everything. It changed the name of the organization that we sit as members.
That's right.
It changed the direction to do activities. That was something where the finding was just neglect, and it was time to enter this century.
I think the other thing, part of that is that these projects were always state and federal projects. It was always large infrastructure projects, and that local jurisdictions didn't play a very large role. I think Three Rivers changed that the local folks need to be a big part of the discussion as it relates to public safety, because we live behind those levees. And so we have to be step up and be a big part of whether it's design work or financing or how to maintain those levees. Our levee districts are the ones in charge of doing that, and they need to be part of it. So I think Three Rivers really kind of set a path forward on how levee work is done.
Well, you got Sutter Butte Flood Control to try to equal you. So yeah, you started that path there, of course. Oh, Member Andrews. I thought he was poking at me to fix my mic. Yes, ma'am.
That little tidbit reminded me of something else. I understand that Sacramento Bee is planning on doing a story in recognition of the 40 years since that flood and the effect on the flood system on the American River. And so I'm not sure when that will happen and when it will come out, but I believe Member Countryman is, again, part of the panel that will be interviewed and contribute to that discussion. So something to keep an eye out for.
He's a popular guy.
Yeah.
I would think he would be. I mean, he was in the middle of all that. And yes, it was devastating to your communities. But it was also an impact to those of us who took them in because they were flooded, so they came to my community. No, that was stunning. It just changed everything. Okay. Anything else? All right. Ms. Andrews took care of announcing the advisory committee meeting. Our next board meeting is what we call a business meeting. It's February 27th, somewhere in this building. Coordinating committee meeting next is March 24th, West Sacramento City Hall. And maybe the online will work this next time. It's, their ability to do that is not as good as what we have in this room. And then a board meeting again in March 27th. So that's what's coming forward. Plus the advisory committees work, and we'll hear from that, and we'll schedule more active inputs and reports on what this is going. We're not going to wait till 2027. We're anxious. We're all anxious. There's just nods across there. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? We're adjourned.